Did you know that there's about 19,500 incorporated actual cities or towns in this country? That's a lot. And 75% of them are tiny, places under 5,000 people. That means there's lots of places you haven't heard about in each state. There's probably cities right next door to your city that you've probably never been to yet. At least, not very often. Together, as a group, we're going to do a quick stop at every single bad place in every single state. Some you've heard of, and many you probably have not. But that's why we're here, right? To learn, people. Okay, so instead of focusing on how each of these places is dangerous and poor and job challenged, we'll just assume that all of them are those things. And instead of just focusing on the poverty and crime in these areas, I'm going to try to shed light on all of them with a little bit of additional information. So enough talking. We have a lot of ground to cover. Let's get started. We're cities in every state. We're cities in every state. We're cities in every state. They're bad, but there's nice people in them. We begin here in Alabama, a state with many troubled large cities. Here in Selma, 40% of people live in poverty, which is a lot, even for Alabama. The number of people out of work is 3 times higher than the state average. The poverty and lack of jobs are the main reasons this poverty has dropped by 8% over the last 5 years. You might be challenged to find a comfortable place to live in the state of Alaska because, well, it's Alaska. But in a little place called Houston, it's less comfortable than just about anywhere else. This place is not too far from Anchorage, but still way out in the middle of nowhere. Fatal drug overdoses are super high and crime is the 4th highest in the whole state. But you can buy a t-shirt for this place for $18.75 to show off your favorite place. No word on how many of these have been sold. South Tucson is, sadly, a challenging place for folks. 50% of this place lives in poverty, which is almost as high as you'll see in the whole nation. This teeny little city is, well, south of Tucson. And one article, mine, called it the most dangerous small town in the whole nation. This city has the 4th highest property crime rate and is the 10th most violent of all cities in the country under 50,000 people. West Memphis, sadly, is just west of Memphis, which is in Tennessee. It's just about all F's across the board for this community. The cost of living gets an A+ because it's super cheap, as in $29,000 for this listing, which does not come with a swimming pool, but your monthly payment would be $114 a month. That is, if you didn't spend that $114 at the local dog track, that is. And dog tracks are not typically frequented by responsible and moral individuals. California. No, Trolls, where Nick Johnson grew up, is not the worst place to live in the state. It's actually Adelanto, a desert-type community about an hour from where I grew up. Sort of a I have to pull over on my way to Las Vegas to get gas and pee kind of place. This was once a proud town, though. Home to George Air Force Base, but like many other struggling communities in Southern California, when the base closed, so went the good. Now, the leading economic assets here are cannabis and prisons, which is so sad it's actually kind of funny. Hey, Colorado, a lovely state, but not Pueblo, sadly. Dirt and tumbleweeds are kinda pretty sometimes, but poverty and trash all over the place are not. They call it P-Town here, by the way. The east side is the worst side of town, with rundown trailer parks, drunks, druggies, and thieves. For such a large place, there are a lot of setbacks here. Pueblo is where they based Cousin Eddie's house on in the hit 80s movie Vacation, if that's an indication of the type of people you'll find in Pueblo. Connecticut used to be the jam up here in the Northeast. Hartford, the state's capital city, is actually the worst place in the whole state, sadly. Here, I did a video about that once. Hartford is not like the rich, successful part of Connecticut, though. It's the opposite. It's the poorest city of all state capitals and has the most people who live in poverty. And it has the nation's 2nd highest jobless rate, too. That's because Hartford has a terrible public school system and, as a result, the 2nd lowest college attendance rate. Many people don't even know where Delaware is on a map, so you totally wouldn't know where Laurel is. It's a teeny little place down here in the corner of the state. There's only 3,700 people here, which isn't why it's a lousy place. It's kind of hard to find anything interesting about this poor, desolate place, but I kept hearing about all these potato houses all over Laurel. What's a potato house, you wonder? They are places to store sweet potatoes. They grew a lot of those here once. Belglade is the worst place you can live in Florida. It's a farming community where you wouldn't find a job unless you were a farmer. Most people live in poverty. Crime is 5 times higher than the national average. It once had the highest HIV infection rate in the whole country, so they called it Bell AIDS. There's nothing to do here all day but stare out into the muck, watch the sugarcane grow, lock your doors when somebody escapes from the local prison, and wish you were at the beach. There's a place called East Point in Georgia, which is a real sad place. It's on the south side of Atlanta, which is the worst side of Atlanta. Lots of liquor stores and pawn shops and drug dealers. East Point's the most dangerous place in the whole state, which is saying a lot. You'd have a 1 in 7 chance of being a victim if you moved here. If you don't have a burglar alarm or a car alarm, expect trouble, mister.
Plus, it's by the busiest airport in the world, so you have to deal with this crap all the time.
Are there really bad places in Hawaii? Sure there are, like Makaha. It's poor and isolated. The jobless and poverty rates are 3 times the state average. Now, the isolated part might be appealing to many of us who are sick of the BS, but no towns, gas stations, or restaurants nearby might be enough to make you think differently. Or not. But the surfing's great here, where waves get to be about 15 feet each winter. Cowabunga, dude. Idaho is where all the cool kids are moving who can't stand the cost and drama of the West Coast. But if you move here, don't move to Caldwell. Or maybe do. I mean, this place ranks poorly by data, but come on, it's Idaho. How bad can Caldwell really be? Chicago or Springfield might be at the top of your mind when it comes to terrible places in Illinois, but it's the small community of East St. Louis that takes the prize. This is a blighted, run-down, crime-ridden place where the drug dealers from St. Louis come to pick on people and re-up on supplies. As you can see from my most recent trip to this sad place, a majority of the community has been razed and left to pasture. Good riddance. And speaking of my Midwest Rust Belt tour, I also recently visited Gary, Indiana, which is a suburb of Chicago. Think south side of Chicago without all the homes and trains and things to do. You can actually buy a home like this in Gary for $1, but the trick is you have to actually live there. Joke's on you, pal. Gary's home to generational crime and endless violence, and the poverty here is on the level of a third world country at times. Just about as rock bottom as you can get in the USA. Way out along the Mississippi River, practically in Illinois, is the smallish community of Clinton. Here you'll find a place with high crime where 70% of renters live below the poverty line of $25,000 a year. This was a former lumber town, but then they ran out of trees. So manufacturing stepped in to replace the lumber mills, but overseas competition killed the manufacturing. They need something else here to put the people back to work. Not too far away is Kansas, and within this state is Coffeyville, a community of about 10,000 people and falling. This person says, just got out of prison and moved to Coffeyville. I really want to go back to prison. I can't think of anything else that's...
Did you know Coffeyville is home to the inventor of the icy, Omar Nedlick?
What? Mappy? No way. Huh. Looks like he sold the icy machine to 7-Eleven, which renamed them Slurpee machines. Thanks, Mappy. Hey, here's a Slurpee for your kid for being so smart.
Yum! Thanks, Dad.
Thanks, Dad. I'm the one who bought it. There's a place called Mayfield, which is just about as far away from civilization as you can be in Kentucky. 1 out of 5 people dropped out of high school, and a ton of people are poverty-stricken as a result. If you live here and you're young, you hate life. If you live here and you're gay or black, you hate life. Walmart or tobacco farms are hiring, though. Kind of sad, actually. Louisiana has some super nice and generous people, but if you asked folks from around the state where the worst place to live is, you'd hear Bastrop over and over. This teeny place way up near Arkansas has a 50% poverty rate and a crime rate that's triple the national average, which is why nearly 1,000 people left this place in the last 5 years alone. Sad. Here's the difference between a bad place in Maine and a bad place in our next state, Maryland. Biddeford, a little place outside of Portland, is considered Maine's worst place on paper. Here, there's been 8 murders since 2005, and the poverty rate is 17%. In Elkton, a depressing place just outside of Baltimore, there have been 18 murders, and the poverty rate is 22%. Elkton is significantly smaller than Maine's worst town, too, and the other metrics are similarly skewed. You could surmise Maine's worst places would actually be average places in most other states. Springfield, Massachusetts isn't a place where families can thrive without a cause. Close to 1 in 3 people is on government assistance, which is terrible. Drug dealers often shoot each other. There's a ton of litter and traffic. And since there's a high percentage of families whose first language isn't English, the schools here have much lower test scores than the rest of the state. Of course, there's good in every place though. There's some really great, kind, hard-working people in Springfield, and it has a lot of history. The dictionary was invented here, as was the gas-powered car and basketball. Cool. It's pretty much a toss-up between Detroit and Flint, but it's Flint by a nose. These two cities are both dangerous and poor, but Detroit has some life to it, and drinkable water. Flint has failed to revolutionize its own economy after the auto industry left, and those that remain don't seem to have the skills to innovate. After all the riots we just had here this spring, you might think Minneapolis would be the worst place to live in this state. It's not. Just outside of Duluth is the rural city of Cloquet. Logging was a big deal a century ago, but that was, 100 years ago. There are still some good blue-collar jobs here, but they pay low and they are hard to find. There's a teeny place in Mississippi called Forest that's off the charts bad in what's widely considered the worst state in America. Forest, located way out in the middle of a forest an hour outside of Jackson, has the state's highest dropout rate, poorest population, and cheapest homes in the state. Now I wish I could show you how much a home just sold for here, but there haven't been any. This cute house has been on the market for 3 months, and it's only $35,000. I bet if you offered $10,000, somebody would take your call. On the north end of St. Louis, which is the worst end of St. Louis, is the community of Spanish Lake. 10% of the people here have left in the last 5 years alone. The number of folks who don't work is twice the national average, and crime is atrocious. It's places near St. Louis like Spanish Lake which push St. Louis to the top of all lists as most dangerous place to live in the country. There's bad places to live in Montana? Relatively. There's a place called Hardin, which is right up against a Native American reservation where 20% of the population lives in poverty and 10% of people are out of work. But come on, this place has 3,300 people and crime is way below the national average. I had to pick a place. Hardin would be a great place to live in just about any other state. Just saying. Living way out in the middle of Nebraska boonies near Wyoming used to sound like a nightmare. In today's messed up America, it doesn't sound so bad anymore now, does it? That said, Scottsbluff would not be a desirable place to flee the American humanity. The big three, drugs, poverty, and crime are nagging issues here, and it's getting worse. A Scottsbluff resident who simply goes by Kate had this scathing review, using words like meth, drinking, theft, sex, drama, felony, sad, dark, bored, and waste of land.
Dang, Kate, want a job?
Wedged between Death Valley and Las Vegas is the beat-up desert town of Pahrump, Nevada. Believe it or don't, there's 36,000 people who have decided to live here on the edge of Nye County. Now, this was a former headquarters for many gold miners in the region, but now, instead of gold in their pockets, many Pahrumpers have drugs and guns in them. It's the kind of place where people know they can live off the system and get away with anything, and that's why they live here. Manchester is sort of a big place for New Hampshire, located along the southern border, where social, financial, emotional, and substance abuse problems are the day-to-day. New Hampshire's biggest city is also its second most dangerous per capita. But on the bright side, Manchester has been called a tax-friendly city. And apparently, there's an emerging poetry scene here too. So there's that. Camden residents are twice as likely to be unemployed as their Jersey peers, and 3 times more likely to live in poverty. Much of Camden is a straight ghetto. There's no other word to describe it. Not too long ago, Camden's murder rate was one of the highest murder rates ever recorded in American history. And since the mid-'80s, Camden has never seen its yearly violent crime rate drop lower than 4 times the national average. And that is just crazy. There's a place way out in the New Mexico desert called Deming that's sadly the pits. Luna County, where Deming is challenged as a whole, but Deming is the center of the problem, where drugs have taken hold. While there's some great people here, for many of them, they don't live in Deming, they serve time in Deming. Of all the troubled places in upstate, and the fact that New York City itself is filled with crime and managed by unpopular people, the little village of Monticello is the worst place in New York. The schools are in bad shape, crime is super high for such a small place, and many of the buildings are dilapidated and abandoned, and drug use here has never been higher. Lexington is way out there, sort of by Winston-Salem and Greensboro. Shockingly, 10% of households here earn less than 10 grand a year, which is absolutely the poorest place in the state. And to be honest, pretty eye-opening on how many people out in rural North Carolina rely on major government assistance. Most people in Lexington are either out of work or have low-paying jobs, and drugs have taken hold of this community big time. Bottineau, a teeny little place so far north it might as well be in Canada, is North Dakota's worst place, although you could argue that any of the state's mini towns of 100 people could be considered worse. In any event, Bottineau is understandably a place with high unemployment and a little bit of crime and drug use, cause, well, look at it. But this is home to Tommy Turtle, the world's largest turtle, a symbol of the nearby Turtle Mountains. You might think Cincinnati or Cleveland or Chillicothe or Dayton or Portsmouth might be the worst place to live in Ohio, and you would have a good point, but the bragging rights go to Little Middletown, a smallish place about halfway between Cincinnati and Dayton. Drugs, crime, poverty, and blight might make Middletown the worst place in the entire Midwest. Rural Oklahoma is charming in its own way, but not Little Poto. It's basically the same kind of place we saw in Middletown, Ohio, except it's in Oklahoma. But of course, there's some good people in this small town. If you grew up here or like it here, I'm glad. Portland is definitely the worst place in the state. It's not even close. Come on now. And sadly, most of the trouble here is from people who don't actually live in Portland. But Portland's allowed this to happen for months, and there's no end in sight. McKeesport, a community just outside of Pittsburgh, has been deteriorating for decades now and is an example of how poorly our Rust Belt cities have managed their transition from long-time blue-collar production facilities. This entire place looks abandoned in many areas and on a cold winter day seems almost apocalyptic. Runner-up would be a Philadelphia neighborhood called Kensington. You should Google Kensington and you'll understand why. There aren't very many cities in Rhode Island, but Central Falls draws the short straw. Providence County, where Central Falls is, has a drug overdose rate almost twice as high as the national average and a poverty rate that's 3 times the national average. Right along I-95 is Dillon, South Carolina. The schools rank last here in terms of spending per pupil, and the parents are struggling to make ends meet. But look at all the churches within a 5-minute drive. At least they have God in their lives. And you're only 10 minutes away from south of the border, so you can get all the fireworks you can fit into your car and play mini golf all afternoon. That's fabulous! Take I-95 north from Sioux Falls and make a right at the 4th gas station, and you'll roll right into Floundrew, population 2,438. There's actually a casino in this town, which probably makes the problem here even worse, sadly. No, Memphis is not the worst place you can live in this state, although it's terrible in many ways. Little Ripley, about an hour north of Memphis, is though. Home values, unemployment rates, and poverty rates are all in the top 10 in this whole state. It's also really boring, at least according to locals. Mostly fast food restaurants is what they say. More than a quarter of the population of Belle Meade, Texas, needs major government assistance to survive. And this small city of 9,000 people just outside of Waco has a whopping 2,300 violent crimes per capita, which is in the top 10% for the whole country, and 6 times the national average. What is going on in Belle Meade, Texas? But at least they have a Whataburger and high school football here, which is likely enough to numb the pain. No one said small towns in Utah have to be exciting or financially responsible. I mean, that's the whole point of living in rural Utah, right? But Vernal is exceptionally isolated and poor. That's because school isn't a priority for Vernal youth, or as it's also known, Utah's dinosaur land. The only dig on Vermont's small towns is high drug use. Drugs have really torn into smallish communities in New England, and Barry's one of them. Windham County has been battling drug use for a long time now. Barry is significantly poorer and more violent than just about any other place in the state. Portsmouth is the most dangerous place in Virginia. Lots of projects. The police officers and emergency personnel who work in Portsmouth do not live in Portsmouth, for a reason. The schools are also awful here. This picture's pretty though. Seattle, of course. Come on, not even close. Fix this place and you've got yourself a great state. Huntington has the most drug users and criminals of all the places in West Virginia. Sure, areas way back in the hills of West Virginia are more boring and backwoods, but peaceful wins this ranking, and Huntington is not peaceful. Ever been to Rockford, Illinois? Not pretty. And just up the road across the Wisconsin state line is Beloit, where jobs are apparently hard to come by based on the number of people who don't have one. It's tired, run down, and tattered, a typical Rust Belt town.
Hot pans for Hormel flavor, great taste you're bound to favor. Hormel's the good time chili now.
But if you love Hormel chili, or making it, you'll love Beloit, because there's a Hormel plant here. Sadly, without Hormel, this place would be even sadder. And here we are at the finish line. Our worst city in our last state, Evansville, a town just outside of Casper, which has about 2,500 people. When you compare it to every other city in the state in terms of poverty, crime, education, and jobs, it ranks last. There's no other way around it. Wow, that was a marathon, right? Hopefully you learned a little bit about each of these cities and about each of these states. And I know that there's good people in every place, and if you're from one of the places I talked about, I'm sorry if I offended you. But if you're from one of these places and you're part of the problem and you're watching this video, well, shouldn't you be out looking for a job instead? I mean, kinda for reals though, right? When the day goes down on my side of town, that crummy feeling goes through my bones, then the whole world feels blue. I wake up every night knowing I'll be alright if I keep my cool. If you live in a place we visited, there's always things that you can do to fix it. Have a good attitude, and with some hard work from you, it'll be okay. Everything will be alright. Probably. Maybe. Sorta. Hey guys, if you learned something new about America or what it's like to live in America, great! You should think about subscribing and turning on your notifications. You can also click one of these videos or playlists for more. You can also now buy my songs on iTunes and other formats. Click the link in the description. Thanks for watching. And remember, while we all might have different views, we should all be nice to each other and try to make the U.S. a better place in a positive way.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.